The dust cloud rose like smoke from hell itself, blocking out the blazing New Mexico sun as 6 riders thundered across the desert plateau. Their horses' hooves pounded against the hard-pan earth in a rhythm that spelled trouble for anyone unfortunate enough to cross their path. At the head of this menacing procession rode Buck Morrison, a man whose scarred face told stories of violence that decent folk preferred not to hear. Morrison raised his gloved hand, and the riders pulled their mounts to a halt beside a weathered wooden sign that read, Santa Rosa, 8 miles. His pale eyes, cold as winter morning frost, scanned the horizon until they fixed on a lone figure in the distance, a modest trading wagon making its slow way along the dusty trail. "There's our pigeon," Morrison growled, his voice rough as sandpaper. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. "Thomas Walker thinks he can buy my merchandise and ride off into the sunset without consequences." One of his men, a wiry desperado named Colt, shifted nervously in his saddle. "Boss, them horses was stolen fair and square from the Apache. Walker bought 'em legal-like." Morrison's hand moved to the ivory grip of his Colt .45. "Nothing's legal when it costs me money, Colt. That fool paid me $60 for 3 of the finest Apache ponies this side of the Rio Grande, then had the audacity to give them back to their original owners. Made me look weak." The trading wagon continued its steady approach, unaware of the trap being set. Thomas Walker, a man in his mid-30s with sun-weathered skin and honest eyes, whistled softly to himself as he guided his 2 faithful mules along the familiar route. His wagon creaked under the weight of supplies destined for the frontier settlements, bolts of cloth, sacks of flour, coffee beans, and various tools that meant the difference between survival and death in this unforgiving land. Thomas had no way of knowing that his act of honesty the previous day had marked him for death. He had simply done what his conscience demanded when 3 Apache warriors had confronted him about the stolen horses. The animals rightfully belonged to them, and despite losing his life savings, Thomas had handed them over without argument. It was the Christian thing to do, his mother would have said. As the wagon drew closer, Morrison signaled his men to spread out across the trail. They formed a deadly semicircle, blocking any hope of escape. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, offering no sanctuary save for a cluster of weathered rocks about a quarter-mile to the south. Too far to reach if shooting started. Thomas spotted the riders and felt his stomach drop. He recognized Morrison immediately, and the memory of their transaction in Tucson came flooding back. The man had been shifty, eager to conclude their business and disappear. Thomas had suspected something wasn't right about those horses, but $60 for 3 animals was too good a deal to pass up. Now he understood why. "Afternoon, Walker," Morrison called out, his voice deceptively cordial. "Mighty fine day for traveling, wouldn't you say?" Thomas brought his wagon to a stop, keeping his hands visible on the reins. His Henry rifle lay within reach beneath the wagon seat, but 6-to-1 odds were poor even for a man who'd survived 3 years on the frontier. "Morrison. Didn't expect to see you again so soon." "Oh, I bet you didn't." Morrison's smile never reached his eyes. "Word travels fast in these parts. Seems you had an encounter with some Apache yesterday. Heard tell you gave away some valuable property." The other riders chuckled, a sound as menacing as rattlesnakes in the dark. Thomas could feel sweat beading on his forehead despite the desert wind. "Those horses belonged to them. You know that as well as I do." "What I know," Morrison said, his voice hardening, "is that you cost me a very important business arrangement. The Apache and I had what you might call an understanding. They'd lose some horses, I'd sell them to unsuspecting traders, and everyone would be happy. Except now they know I was behind it." Thomas's mind raced. Morrison wasn't just a horse thief, he was running a deliberate operation to provoke conflicts between the Apache and white settlers. Every stolen horse he sold to innocent traders like Thomas would eventually find its way back to the Apache, creating a cycle of mistrust and violence that men like Morrison could exploit. "You're trying to start a war," Thomas said quietly. "I'm trying to make a living," Morrison replied. "And you just made that considerably more difficult. The Apache chief, Mateo, sent word that any of my men caught on their land will be killed on sight. That's bad for business." Colt leaned forward in his saddle. "Boss, maybe we should just. Shut up, Morrison snapped. Then, turning back to Thomas, here's what's going to happen, Walker. You're going to compensate me for my losses. I figure $200 should cover it. Thomas nearly laughed despite the danger. I don't have $200. I barely had the $60 I paid you. Then you have a problem. Morrison's hand moved to his gun. Because I'm not leaving here empty-handed. The desert fell silent except for the whisper of wind through sagebrush and the nervous snorting of horses. Buzzards circled high overhead, as if sensing the approaching violence. Thomas glanced at the sun, calculating how much daylight remained. If he could somehow survive the next few minutes, darkness might offer a chance of escape. I might have something else, Thomas said slowly. Information that could be worth more than $200. Morrison's eyes narrowed with interest. I'm listening. Yesterday, when I met with the Apache, Chief Mateo mentioned something about a trading post. Said there was going to be a big gathering next week. Tribes from all over the territory coming together. Could be an opportunity for someone with the right connections. It was a desperate lie, but Thomas sold it with the confidence of a man who'd spent years negotiating with skeptical customers. Morrison studied him for a long moment, clearly weighing the potential profit against the satisfaction of immediate revenge. What kind of gathering? Morrison asked. Thomas's mind worked frantically. He needed to make this sound credible enough to buy time, but not so appealing that Morrison would demand to be taken there immediately. Some kind of ceremony. Marriage, I think. The chief's daughters are involved. The mention of Mateo's daughters caused a stir among Morrison's men. Everyone in the territory knew stories about the three Apache sisters, Ayana the warrior, Ciala the medicine woman, and Nayeli the artist. They were said to be as beautiful as they were formidable, and many had tried unsuccessfully to win their favor. Morrison's cruel smile returned. Now that's interesting. Mateo's daughters, you say? Tell me more. Thomas felt like a man walking a tightrope over a canyon. One wrong word would send him plummeting into violence and death. The chief invited me to trade at their settlement. Said I'd be welcome because of what I did with the horses. I'm supposed to go there tomorrow. Convenient, Morrison mused. Very convenient indeed. The desperado leader sat back in his saddle, clearly formulating a plan. Thomas could almost see the gears turning in the man's devious mind. Whatever Morrison was thinking, it wouldn't end well for the Apache or for Thomas himself. Here's what we're going to do, Walker, Morrison finally said. You're going to keep that appointment tomorrow. You're going to go to that Apache settlement and conduct your business like nothing's wrong. But you're also going to gather information for me. I want to know everything about their defenses, their routines, and especially about those daughters. Thomas felt sick. I won't spy for you. Oh, but you will. Morrison drew his pistol and casually aimed it at Thomas's chest. Because if you don't, I'll ride into that settlement myself and tell Chief Mateo that you've been working with me all along. That you helped me steal those horses in the first place. How do you think that will go over? The trap was perfect in its simplicity. Thomas would be branded a traitor by the very people who had shown him respect and kindness. The Apache had their own harsh justice for those who betrayed their trust, and it didn't involve quick deaths. What do you really want? Thomas asked. Morrison holstered his weapon but kept his hand resting on the grip. I want those daughters. All three of them. Mateo's been too powerful in this territory for too long, and his daughters are his weakness. Once I have them, the old chief will do anything I ask. The full scope of Morrison's evil plan began to crystallize. He wasn't just after money or horses, he wanted to break the power of the most influential Apache leader in the region. By kidnapping Mateo's daughters, he could force the chief into submission or provoke him into a war that would bring down the full might of the U.S. Army on the Apache people. You're insane, Thomas whispered. I'm ambitious, Morrison corrected. And you're going to help me, or you're going to die right here in the desert. Your choice. Thomas looked at the faces surrounding him and saw no mercy, no possibility of appeal. These were men who killed for profit and slept soundly afterward. His only chance lay in appearing to cooperate while somehow finding a way to warn the Apache of the approaching danger. "All right," he said finally. "I'll do it." Morrison's grin widened. "Smart man. We'll be camped at Devil's Canyon, about 5 miles north of the Apache settlement. You bring me detailed information tomorrow night, and maybe you'll live to see the sunrise." As the desperados wheeled their horses around and galloped away in a cloud of dust, Thomas sat alone in his wagon, feeling the weight of impossible choices pressing down on him like the desert heat. He had less than 24 hours to figure out how to save the Apache people who had shown him kindness, protect Mateo's daughters from a fate worse than death, and somehow survive Morrison's deadly game. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of blood and gold. Thomas picked up the reins and urged his mules forward, knowing that tomorrow would bring either redemption or disaster. In the distance, smoke from Apache cooking fires rose into the evening sky like prayers to gods who might not be listening. As darkness began to fall across the vast New Mexico territory, Thomas Walker found himself caught between two worlds, trusted by neither and facing a choice that would define not only his own fate but the future of everyone in this harsh and beautiful land. The first chapter of his greatest test was about to begin. The Apache settlement lay nestled in a natural basin surrounded by red sandstone cliffs that seemed to glow like embers in the early morning light. Thomas had barely slept during the long night, his mind churning through dozens of plans, each more desperate than the last. As his wagon crested the final ridge, he could see smoke rising from cooking fires and the silhouettes of people going about their morning routines, unaware of the danger lurking just beyond their peaceful world. Chief Mateo emerged from his lodge as Thomas approached, his weathered face breaking into what might have been the closest thing to a smile the Apache leader ever allowed himself. Behind him came his 3 daughters, each as striking as the stories claimed, yet each carrying herself with a dignity and strength that spoke of their father's influence. Ayanna stepped forward first, her dark eyes assessing Thomas with the keen intelligence of a born warrior. She wore traditional Apache clothing adorned with intricate beadwork, but Thomas noticed the way she moved, the subtle positioning that kept her within easy reach of the knife at her belt. This was not a woman who would be taken easily. Ciala followed, her presence somehow calming despite the tension Thomas felt coiled in his chest. She carried herself with the serene confidence of someone who understood both the healing arts and the deeper mysteries of life and death. Her gaze seemed to see past Thomas's obvious nervousness to something deeper. Finally came Nayeli, the youngest, whose artistic eye took in every detail of Thomas's appearance, his wagon, even the way he held the reins. She tilted her head slightly, as if studying a particularly interesting problem, and Thomas felt uncomfortably as though she could see right through his carefully constructed facade. "Thomas Walker," Mateo said in his careful English. "You have come as promised. This shows honor." The word honor hit Thomas like a physical blow. Here he was, preparing to betray the very people who had welcomed him, all to save his own worthless hide. He climbed down from his wagon, his legs unsteady, and forced himself to meet the chief's eyes. "Chief Mateo, I am grateful for your invitation. I have brought what goods I could manage." His voice sounded hollow to his own ears, but the Apache seemed to take it for modesty. Ayanna spoke in rapid Apache to her father, her tone questioning. Thomas caught only a few words, but her body language suggested concern. Mateo replied with what sounded like reassurance, then turned back to Thomas. "My daughter asks if you are well. She says you have the look of a man carrying heavy thoughts." Thomas felt sweat break out across his forehead despite the cool morning air. These people were far more perceptive than Morrison had given them credit for. "I'm fine, just tired from the journey. It's been a difficult few days." Ciala stepped closer, and Thomas noticed she carried a small leather pouch filled with what were undoubtedly medicinal herbs. "Perhaps you would like some tea? I have something that helps with troubled sleep." The genuine kindness in her voice made Thomas's deception feel even more poisonous. These weren't the savage enemies that men like Morrison portrayed them as. They were people, with the same concerns for family and community that any decent folk would have. "That's very kind," Thomas managed. As the morning progressed, Thomas found himself drawn deeper into the life of the settlement. The Apache went about their daily routines with an efficiency born of generations of survival, but there was also laughter, conversation, and a sense of community that Thomas had rarely experienced in the white settlements. Nayeli showed him some of her artwork, intricate patterns woven into blankets and painted on pottery that spoke of a sophisticated culture with deep artistic traditions. Her enthusiasm was infectious as she explained the meaning behind various symbols, her English improving as she became more comfortable with the conversation. "This pattern represents the eternal cycle," she said, pointing to a complex geometric design. "Birth, growth, death, and renewal. My grandmother taught me that understanding this cycle is the key to wisdom." Thomas nodded, though his mind was elsewhere. He found himself cataloging details almost against his will, the number of warriors he saw, the layout of the lodges, the routines that governed daily life. The information Morrison wanted was all there, readily available to anyone who cared to observe. But as the day wore on, Thomas began to understand something else. The Apache weren't defenseless. Even in their daily activities, there was a constant awareness, a readiness that spoke of a people who had survived by being perpetually alert to danger. Warriors moved with casual efficiency that suggested years of training. Even the women and children seemed to know exactly what to do if trouble arose. Morrison's plan wasn't just evil, it was likely to be a disaster for everyone involved. Ayana materialized beside him as he was examining some of the settlement's horses, her approach so silent he hadn't heard her coming. "You are thinking very hard about our horses," she observed. Thomas jumped, then tried to cover his nervousness with a laugh. "Sorry, I was just admiring them. Beautiful animals. They are." She studied his face with those penetrating dark eyes. "Yesterday, you returned 3 of them to us. My father says this was unusual. It was the right thing to do. Was it?" Ayana moved closer, and Thomas realized she was deliberately testing his comfort level. Most white men would have demanded proof they were stolen. Some would have fought rather than give them up. "You did neither." Thomas felt as though he was being interrogated by someone who already knew all the answers. "I could see they belonged with your people. The way they responded to your warriors, the markings. It was obvious. Obvious to you, perhaps. But you are not like most traders who come through this territory." Ayana's voice carried a note of speculation that made Thomas's skin crawl. "Tell me, Thomas Walker, what do you know about the man who sold you those horses?" The direct question hit Thomas like a punch to the stomach. This was exactly the kind of conversation he'd been hoping to avoid. "Not much. His name was Buck Morrison." Seemed eager to make a quick sale. "Buck Morrison." Ayana repeated the name as if tasting something bitter. "Yes, we know this name. He has been problematic for some time." Before Thomas could respond, Ciala appeared with a steaming cup of tea. The aroma was pleasant, earthy, and complex, but Thomas hesitated before accepting it. In his current state of paranoia, even kindness seemed potentially dangerous. "It's just willow bark and chamomile," Ciala said gently, apparently reading his hesitation. "Nothing that will harm you." Thomas accepted the cup gratefully and took a sip. The warmth was soothing, and he felt some of the tension in his shoulders begin to ease. "Thank you. That's very good." Ciala sat beside him on a flat boulder that served as an impromptu bench. "You carry great worry," she said simply. "It shows in your eyes, the way you hold yourself. Is there something we should know?" The question was asked so gently, with such obvious concern, that Thomas nearly broke down and confessed everything right then. The urge to unburden himself was almost overwhelming. Here were people who had shown him nothing but kindness, and he was preparing to repay them with betrayal. "We all carry worry," he said instead. "It's the nature of life out here." "True," Ciala agreed. "But some burdens are not meant to be carried alone." As the afternoon wore on, Thomas found himself in increasingly complex conversations with all 3 daughters. Each seemed to be approaching him from a different angle, as if they were collectively trying to solve some puzzle he represented. Nayeli asked about his family, his background, his dreams for the future. Her questions seemed innocent enough, but Thomas began to sense a deeper purpose. He realized, trying to understand who he really was beneath the surface. Ayana was more direct, asking about his experiences with other tribes, his knowledge of the land, his skill with weapons. Her questions felt like a warrior evaluating a potential ally or enemy. Ciala focused on his emotional state, his health, his spiritual well-being. She seemed genuinely concerned about the conflict she clearly sensed within him. By late afternoon, Thomas realized he was in serious trouble. Not from any external threat, but from his own growing attachment to these people. The Apache hadn't just welcomed him, they had begun to treat him like family. The three daughters weren't just being polite, they were genuinely interested in him as a person. And he was planning to betray them all. As the sun began to set, Chief Mateo approached Thomas with a serious expression. "Thomas Walker, I would speak with you privately." Thomas's heart hammered as he followed the chief to a quiet spot near the edge of the settlement. Was his deception discovered? Had Morrison's men been spotted? "You have made a strong impression on my daughters," Mateo began. "This is not common. They are particular about the men they find worthy of attention." Thomas stared at the chief, not sure he was understanding correctly. "Sir? In our culture, when a man shows honor as you have done, when he gains the respect of a warrior's daughters, certain traditions come into play." Mateo's expression was grave but not unfriendly. "My daughters have asked to speak with you together. This is significant." "I don't understand." Mateo was quiet for a long moment, studying the horizon where the first stars were beginning to appear. "Among my people, when a man proves his worth and gains the favor of unmarried women, those women have the right to declare their intentions. It is an old custom, but one we still honor." The full implications of what Mateo was saying began to dawn on Thomas. The daughter's attention throughout the day hadn't been casual interest. It had been evaluation. And apparently, he had passed whatever test they had been conducting. "They want to choose me?" Thomas asked, his voice barely a whisper. "They want to offer themselves as your wives," Mateo corrected. "All three of them. It is unusual, but not without precedent. A man who has proven himself worthy of one daughter of a chief might be worthy of all three, if they all consent." Thomas felt the world spinning around him. In less than 24 hours, he had gone from being a simple trader to being caught between a vicious desperado's plot and an honor he could never deserve. The Apache daughters wanted to marry him, and he was supposed to be gathering intelligence to help Morrison kidnap them. I don't know what to say." "You say nothing tonight," Mateo replied. "Tomorrow, they will speak to you themselves. If you accept their offer, you become part of our people. If you decline, you do so with honor and remain our friend." As Thomas returned to the guest lodge where he would spend the night, his mind reeled with the impossibility of his situation. Morrison would be expecting him at Devil's Canyon in just a few hours with detailed intelligence about the settlement's defenses and the daughters' routines. But how could he betray people who were offering to make him family? How could he participate in destroying the lives of three women who had chosen to trust him with their futures? As he lay on the comfortable bedding the Apache had provided, staring up at the star-filled desert sky visible through the smoke hole, Thomas realized he had reached the moment of truth. Tomorrow, he would have to choose between saving his own life and protecting the people who had shown him a kindness he had never experienced before. The sound of soft footsteps outside his lodge made him tense. A gentle voice called his name, and he recognized Ciala's healing tones. "Thomas? May I enter? I have something to help you sleep peacefully." As she slipped quietly into the lodge, Thomas realized that whatever happened tomorrow, this night would change everything. The choice he made in the next few hours would define not just his own fate, but the destiny of everyone he had come to care about. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the settlement, Buck Morrison and his men were waiting for information that Thomas was no longer sure he could provide. The night held its breath, waiting for dawn and the choices it would bring.